No? Is there a technical? Oh, now it works. Um, so yeah, my name is Gediminas Morkevicius, and I like to code in PHP, Go, and JavaScript and C. It's off. The sound is good. Okay, perfect. So yeah, and I'm truly an open source geek. I like when people contribute to open source because it helps to innovate and keep away monopolic components, frameworks, and whatever which is sold for some price. And as I mentioned before, open source makes people to innovate, and every contribution, every usage, I like to motivate people to use it more and increase productivity in it. So yeah, I share my stuff at GitHub, and I also like to thank GitHub for bringing on community together. And it's really amazing project, and it has increased contributions and open source rate at maximum levels over these 2 past years. So yes, my talk is about Doctrine2 extensions, and I'll mainly introduce you to it. Also, I will speak about future plans, what I plan to do in next release, which hopefully will be the latest change to the public interface. Currently, extensions are 3 years old, and since then, public interface has changed very less. I mean, very little. So people could use it without any expectations it to fail, because new features only added some properties which were not mandatory. So over these 3 years, it's been maintained. It has maintained it for all Doctrine ORM and ODM releases. It supports mainly 2 versions now. It's 2.2, 2.3, and maybe 2.4 currently supported very well. Okay, thank you. So yeah, the project will be maintained, and I'm the main author of it. There are many contributors who has the public access to it, and they can usually the ones who make new extensions and maintain them, they have full access to the repository, and there are many people like that. They usually review pull requests and do some little changes and discuss if there are bigger changes which are expected for the next release. So the purpose is to provide common model behaviors for Doctrine, and these behaviors are simply known as translatable, sluggable, timestampable, whatever, tree. It's commonly used, and my idea was to simply provide a very useful, simple interface to just add it, configure, and forget about it. It should work very stably, and you will just don't need to edit it anymore, and you will just maintain and focus on the other project sides. So all metadata and mapping and caching is derived from Doctrine ORM, and it reuses same components. There's no different new libraries and nothing else that could impact some changes or dependencies on other libraries which might introduce some BC breaks. So it's clearly separated and isolated. Yeah, and it's a framework-independent library. Currently, it's ported to Zen framework and Symfony2 as a Doctrine extensions bundle. And it's a very simplistic interface to map currently used library dependencies. So here's a basic example for a standard entity class, which defines soft-developable extension. It means that when the record will be deleted from the ORM level, it will just soft-delete it and will filter it out when the next query will attempt to fetch this product. And for example, translatable, it's very simply defined by default behavior, just add an annotation, and this field will be translated in different locale and fetched and loaded in different one, based on the one which comes from session and requests or whatever. Sluggable also is simply defined. It needs some fields to generate a slug, and it's URL friendly after that. Same as timestampable, it just allows you to make timestamps very simply, and there's also a new extension which derived from timestampable, IP traceable, also blamable. So this is just a simple example of how easily you can add these extensions and forget about them. And how do they work in a schematic way. So there's in ORM or DM, there's a unit of work which does all the actual work and dispatches some events based on the changes requested, persistence. And there's hooked event listeners like translatable, tree listener, whatever you need to use for your extension mapping. All change sets are persisted additionally and calculated based on extension behavior. And of course, before doing some changes, listener just loads metadata using the standard ORM or common behavior data mapping. It's annotation, XML, whatever extension uses the driver. The same driver the ORM is configured to. So it's a very simple behavior to include extensions or extend them. So more detailedly about Sluggable. It makes any text representation URL friendly, and it uses a transliteration library which maps different UTF characters to SE representation. For Russian it's different, for German it also might be different, for Chinese there are of course a lot of differences there. So it's quite simple, and transliteration library will probably change, and in next release it will probably use the component from Drupal, which is proved useful, and it's more configured for different kind of languages, because some locales might have different replacements. For example, Russian, Bulgarian, or something like that might have different SCI character replacements. So translatable by default translates all fields into a separate table. It inserts each record for each field for this object, for this entity. And this is of course not performance-wise, because for each field it does left join, and when you have a lot of fields translated or a lot of objects being translated in this table, it might get performance very slow. And so you can optimize in this case and manage your entity translations directly by foreign key for one object specific for one entity, one translation table, and it will be faster. And also I'll mention that in the future translatable probably will change. It will have a generator to generate a translatable entity, a translation entity, which will have all fields currently entity has translated, and there will be only one left join per entity, so, or per collection, so it will be linked directly by foreign key and have only one left join per row entry in database. So that will be very good and the best way it's possible. For current behavior, it's very simple to start using it. You just add annotation and you have it all translated, and you don't need to have generated entities and adjusted if needed and such. So that's how the translations look like. There's a translation table which uses object class and field name, and foreign key as not a direct constraint. So of course for performance it's quite bad, but if you don't have many records translated, it's quite good. And the entity being translated have default English translations here. It can be changed to persist those in the translation table as well, but by default it just doesn't join and uses these translations if entity is being translated in English, for example. And the good feature for translatable is query hints. When you have a query and it's very custom, it has order by or any where statements which you need to look and filter by a translated value, you can just use a query hint and it will join these translations and compare their values instead of the entity default values which it has. You can also use inner join hint. In that case, all untranslated entities will be not fetched in the query. This way you don't have nulls in or default translations. It's same as disabling fallback. Yeah, so timestampable is very simple. You just add how you want to timestamp, create on update or on field change or a relation field change to some value. Sortable is more complicated, but it allows you to sort columns by group. For example, there's a relation, and if there's a same relation for an entity, sorting position will be incrementing, and if it's changing, it will start from 0 again, like you see in the table row select. For the same category ID, it has positions from 0 to 2, and for the category which is different, it has 0 and 1. So you can sort it by a parent relation, parent-children relation. Self-developable, I think I explained it, but also I should add that self-developable is now able to be time aware. If you put a deleted add column, you set it to some date and it's in the future, the entity will be still remaining in your query results, but after this time is reached, it will just do not include it. Yeah, and also for sortable, in the future it will be like, in next release it will be like slugs, definition like slug. It will maintain fields in the same annotation. Now it has sortable position and sortable group separately in annotations. And in next release it will be like Gedmo sortable, and fields, list of fields which will base on position sorting. So interface will be more common for the same different behaviors. Okay. Yeah. Also, soft-deletable needs to include soft-deletable filter, which is at OREM level. I haven't shown the setup now, but documentation on extension repository provides every step you need to set up fully, and it contains also some examples if you use it. And this is just example how entity is not reached anymore. Nested set trees. Tree extension have few strategies for trees. One is nested set. Another one is a closure table, which is not very efficient because OREM does not allow very complex queries to be made. Using MySQL directly, for example, you can make multiple inserts in the same query, which gives good performance for closure tree type. And there is also materialized path, which works together with ODM and OREM extension. So nested set tree mapping defines the strategy it uses. Also, you need to have tree left column, tree right, parent, root if is optional, and level is optional. But documentation, I think, defines it well, and gives some examples how to make this definition, and also using a repository gives you a lot of methods which you can use very well for nested set tree, like persist a node as a child or a sibling of another node. It also, nested set also has a built-in sorting capabilities based on that. So I think this strategy is most widely used, but there are some concurrency issues which I'll talk about later in this talk, and explain how you can defend from your data integrity being compromised during concurrent requests, because transaction is not enough for that. So tree basically looks in database like that. There's left-right values always updated on new inserts or moves for nodes. It also has level and same root. Or if you set a parent to null, it will be a different root. So concerning concurrency issue, currently at my projects I use to prevent locking all tree table, I use some kind of relation. For instance, if we have an organization relation, which is a direct hard relation to project, for example, which is a tree. So project might have nested projects, for instance. And in that case, we said organization is not nullable. That means that every project will need to have a relation to organization. And it will be the same as having a tree root, which you will be able to change in future in next release most probably, to set directly here in this relation as a tree root that would allow to prevent one necessary column. So here's an example of how we can safely lock an organization which will have its projects related unreachable for other transactions being started. So in this example, when we begin a transaction and we lock with pessimistic lock, it's supported in REM for all relational databases. So we do find an organization which we want to update tree for, and it must be this find with lock must be in transaction, and it locks the organization for any read attempts, for any new lock attempts during next requests. So when we safely lock it, another transaction in this attempt will not be able to find this organization. It will wait till the other one is finished. So in that case, we lock only one row. It is organization with a specific ID. And then we update its project tree. Of course, you need to lock all move, insert operations. And then when we finish commit the changes, this organization gets unlocked, and another transaction which was waiting in the queue will find this organization and will lock it. So in that case, when the flush executes, it does premeditated calculations, and if it's not locked, no matter if it runs it in transaction, it will still might compromise your data. So if you have some strange effects like compromising a tree like once in a month or once in a week based on load, you might look into this and be concerned about locking. Locking is very useful for all kinds of atomic updates which you do. So yeah, you should read more about locking for transaction locking and another types of locking, table level and something, whatever you database you are using, but you should be aware of that. So yeah, about next release future plans. Currently, listeners have to be hooked into Event Manager of Doctrine. If it's possible, it will be done like giving an entity manager to extensions, and it automatically will create listeners based on the configuration, or simply some exclusion which, for example, you don't want some listeners to be included. But simply by default giving an entity manager to some function, it should create all extension listeners in place and mapping and stuff. Also, we have like 200 issues open, some features requests, some issues which are repeating, and there was a lot of issues learned over time which we wanted to improve, but on current interface we couldn't, to prevent BC breaks and introducing some hard time to users. we just made it hanging there, and for the next release, for the next major release, all these changes will be thought very well and integrated to have a stable new API, mainly the same API, public API for configuration, but improved one. So there wouldn't be any new versions coming up in 2 years, I think. And people usually put a lot of features, feature requests, pull requests to have new features, new configurations, which extends the time to understand the extensions or to configure them. And I think it would be smarter to put this aside and make it more extensible, for example, adding more extensions on top of it, but not leaving every configuration in the same place and having a lot of options. It just makes it harder to understand, and currently the interface is very simple, and I want to leave it this way. Yes, also documentation improvements will be taken care of, and currently it was like based on user experience. If users open issues, we improve documentation. If we see that it's not explaining something very well. Next time I think we will think that we should think about it more before pushing it to public. So yeah. And of course, myself, I like being compatibility aware a lot, meaning that I don't like BC breaks, and I like a very explicit public interfaces to libraries. And the less they expose, the less, the more they are maintainable and for a longer time available in the same manner. So I will try hard and push hard to make the same and keep the interface more lightweight and more simple for users to adopt. And of course there's a pull request opened for the new version. You can read the tasks marked here and discuss them and add some new if you like to contribute here and express your opinion about it. It's open and open for everyone to have a look and discuss or add your opinion. So thank you, and maybe you have some questions for me. You can ask anything you want. Okay? Yeah.
I have actually two questions. The first one about translatable extension. As I remember, it uses Doctrine output walker. Yep.
Yes.
And the problem is that you can add more than one output walker, but at the same time you can use three walkers. Could you explain why you use this approach?
The output worker was the only choice at the time. I haven't looked at the current implementation of three walkers, but if it's possible to do the same behavior, it will be included in the next release. And yes, I will definitely have a look at it now as you reminded me about it.
Thank you very much. As I remember, tree walker has already parsed a tree of a DQL query, so you can anything do the same. You can replace any fields you want. it will be a really good improvement. And the second one, I faced one interesting performance issue when I imported 27 millions of entities into a tree, Gedma tree I mean. I got stuck approximately on 35,000. Maybe your bundle should provide some kind of data fixture or important useful thing for that.
I think the problem was that you didn't have an index on the left and right value of 3 columns.
I think I had.
You had one. In that case, I doubt that it's 35 records, which is max, 35,000, which is max, because in our current project we have like 200,000 nodes. Maybe you can split those in root trees if it's possible, or add a unique index for those. But no, it won't be possible because atomic updates won't work in that case.
Actually, problem was not in selection. Selection actually worked perfectly. It worked,
but for
fast.
Inserts.
Yes, exactly, inserts. Well, okay, we can discuss
I'll
later.
make a test for that, and if I see some actual performance issue which I can overcome, I will look into it definitely.
Okay.
I'll make a test performance for this. Currently, I have only tested. Do you do inserts in transaction?
Yes.
Yes.
Anything
I
Doctrine
have tested 10,000 concurrent inserts in one transaction, and it was working quite fast. But yeah, as you reminded me now, I will need to look at it. I'm sure extensions are not perfect, and it's more like for small projects with default implementation, and as translatable uses not, it uses also a string column for foreign key, which is of course very problematic for casting and joining. So yes, it's not performance wise.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
My question is about a sortable extension. Is it possible to apply a sortable group annotation to several fields?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. But those relations must be many-to-one or one-to-one, of course, because collections are not fitting here.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyone else? You can ask me on GitHub open issues and discuss some improvements or anything you notice, because your user experience really matters for these kind of projects, of course. So thank you, and have a great conference.